Have you ever felt like you don't fit in the traditional church mold? Well, guess what? You're not alone. In fact, these are the kinds of people Jesus hung out with the most: the outsider, the skeptic, the doubter, those who are disenfranchised, not connected, those on the outside. And so if you have ever felt that way in church circles, guess what? You may be closer to Jesus than you actually think. Welcome to Whiskey in the Writings. This is a place for skeptics, the spiritually curious, those who still believe, maybe just not like they used to. It's a place where you can discover the Bible in fresh and meaningful ways for your life today. My name is Joe Oliver, and for the past 24 years, I've been in pastoral ministry. I hold a master's degree in biblical theology, and if you've got questions, this is the place for you. Let's get started. Over the course of my 24 years of being in pastoral roles, whether that was a youth pastor, an associate pastor, or a lead pastor, I've come across so many people who want to believe, they just don't know if they belong. In fact, they don't fit the mold at all. Most churches tend to have a rhythm or a look about them or a way to exist within that community. And if you don't fit that mold, it's easy to feel like you're on the outside of it. And for a lot of people, that just means giving up altogether because they equate that religious environment for who Jesus is and what Jesus desires for them. Well, today at Whiskey in the Writings, we're actually going to look at characters in the Bible that didn't fit the mold. They were on the outside, and yet that's who Jesus pursued the most. And so, like I said in the opening, if you're someone who feels like, man, I just can't do church, I can't do those religious systems, and you're trying to find a place to belong, I would argue you're probably closer to Jesus than you think. And before we get into that conversation, it's time to talk about the whiskey that we're drinking here on this video. So today I've got, once again, Heaven Hill. This is a bourbon we've tasted a lot on this channel. It's a great bourbon. I bring it back out because, again, I'm not someone who holds a lot of bourbons on the shelf. I don't keep a lot of things in, all my bourbons are right above me, and there's not a lot there. So I tend to get through stuff before I go out and buy new stuff. Maybe one day as this channel grows and we can do something with it, I'll have a lot more variation, but we got to get through some of the stuff I have. So I'm going back to Heaven Hill. I was given to this at Christmas from my brother-in-law, Josh. This is a great, I've never had it before. It's really good. I made a mistake though this past weekend. So I busted it out on Saturday night, and I typically on a weekend, I like to mix it with some like Coke Zero or something like that. I know. We don't do that here on this channel, and that was a mistake. It actually wasn't very good. So this isn't a mixing bourbon. I wouldn't recommend using it as a mixer, but standalone, it's actually really good. And if you've seen me talk about this bottle of bourbon in particular, it's good when it's had time to breathe, which is to let air into it. You can aerate it too if you want, or put some drops of water in your bourbon if you're drinking it neat. A lot of times ice will do that for you, but there are certain bourbons where I like it cold, and so I'll use ice, or I just like it the way it is. And so I've had this out. It's been just sitting in the open, so it takes that bite off the front end, where you get that burn in some whiskeys. Some people like that. I tend to not, and so I want it to breathe a little bit, to take a little bit of that burn out of it. But it's a delicious bourbon if you're just drinking it neat or on the rocks. I wouldn't recommend mixing it with anything. And today, you'll notice I don't have my whiskey in the Writings glass. I have a Sun Valley glass, and I'm drinking out of this for my daughter. She recently got married to just a great guy, Isaac. They went to Sun Valley for their honeymoon. That's in Idaho. She brought me back this whiskey glass. So I thought I would feature it on the channel. That's what I'm drinking out of today. So whatever you have in front of you, pour your drink, drink responsibly, and cheers. Okay, for today's writings, we're gonna zoom in to a character story in the Gospels that I think highlight this notion that we're talking about, being an outcast, being someone who's looked at as different, being treated differently because of where you're at in life. You might have heard this before if you've grown up in church, but there's a character named Matthew. He's a tax collector that Jesus calls into relationship, into discipleship with him. This story is found in Matthew chapter 9. And before we get there, I want to set the stage contextually, things that might help us understand the significance and impact of a story like this. First off, the Gospel of Matthew was written to the Jewish people. And so tradition kind of tells us that this had an emphasis and a focus on communicating Jesus as the Messiah, much in the role of Moses, who came to be a prophet that brought a law, a way forward, a rescue out of Egypt, a new law. There's all of these undertones in Matthew's gospel that are specifically tailored to a Jewish audience. What's interesting is that when you read the other synoptics, like Mark or Luke, there's a lot of times that they'll tell similar stories that Matthew does, but then they actually define for the audience what those things mean. And so a lot of times there might be a Jewish phrase that's used, and Mark will say, and this is what this means. And the reason why they do that is because of the audience that they're writing to. So Luke and Mark, primarily writing to Gentile audiences, wouldn't have understood the references at the time that they were writing, or the geographical location that they were writing, may not have understood the real Jewish implications of what Jesus was doing. And so they had to define those things. And so what you get in Matthew is a lot of Jewish imagery all throughout his writing. Another key example of this difference is how they explain the kingdom according to what Jesus was preaching and teaching. In Matthew's gospel, you'll get the kingdom of heaven, a pretty common Jewish term, way to think about God's space. And yet in Mark's gospel and in Luke's gospel, you have the kingdom of God. And so it was a way, again, to communicate the rule and reign of God, which for a Jewish audience, that was heaven. That was God's space where his rule and reign was active. And so Matthew will use words that are connected to his audience, who he was writing to, whereas the other synoptics, Mark and Luke, don't. And so what we see here in Matthew is that he's writing to his own people, trying to help them see who Jesus is as the rightful anointed one who was anointed to come and bring Israel back into relationship with God and enter into co-rule or a reestablishment of Israel. And so he's trying to help them see how Jesus fits into that story. And he does it in really creative ways. And one of the ways that he communicates the story and the message of Jesus is in who he invites to come around him. That for us, when we read it, we may not have the social sensibilities that they had at that time. And thus, we lose some of the impact and meaning. So what I want to try to do in this passage is really uncover and unpack what's going on behind the scenes, why it would have been important, so that we can see what that may mean for us today. So that's what we're going to do in this writings portion. And I would invite you to turn to, if you have your Bibles open, to Matthew chapter 9. Again, it's a famous story. If you've been in church for any period of time in your life, you may be somewhat familiar with this. If not, let's get right into it. This is Matthew chapter 9, verse 9. This is how, I'm going to read the whole thing, then we're going to go back and we're going to pick it apart. So it says this: As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax booth. "Follow me," he said to him. So he got up and followed him. As Jesus was having a meal in Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" When Jesus heard this, he said, "Those who are healthy do not need a physician, but those who are sick do. Go and learn what this saying means. I want mercy and not sacrifice, for I did not come to call the righteous, but the sinners." Okay, pretty basic story, but there's a lot happening here. So let's begin to pull out some of the key elements. Let's read this again. So as Jesus went on from there, it says he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax booth. Okay, what's going on? So presumably this guy is there doing tax collection. Now, we know that, I'm in the U.S. and so we pay our taxes, and it's always kind of one of those times in American culture that's hated, but it's like this thing we hate, but you kind of have to do it. It's what pays for our roads and pays for schooling and pays for things that we are able to enjoy in the United States. But it's never a fun thing, right? We want to pay as less taxes as we possibly can. Well, that certainly would have been the case in their day as well. As Rome was the superpower of the day, Rome was occupying the area. They would have collected taxes so that they can continue their empire building. Not uncommon. This happens. You get conquered, you pay taxes. That's how it works. Part of this is, they would have hated that just simply because it's paying taxes. But there's another part of this that actually is even more damaging to the story, in that there were Jewish citizens that were participating in the tax collection services. So imagine for a second, you get conquered. Your hometown gets conquered. And the conquering power that comes in and just wipes everything out and says, you got to follow our way now. And you're like, well, okay, I don't have a choice. We've been beaten. And they set up a system of tax collection. So now you have this foreign entity imposing onto you a collection of money that you've worked hard to earn. And now you've got to give a portion of that to this foreign empire that's conquered you. You want your own freedom. It's your land. It's your home. But now you're being forced to do something that's not voluntary. And then you find out that someone from your neighborhood is the one collecting the taxes. So not only are you dealing with the frustration of being conquered and being ruled over, the frustration of the collection of taxes on your goods that you collect from this foreign invader, and then one of your friends, your neighbor, begins to participate in the act of the empire. It's this complicit engagement with the enemy that caused a disdain in the Jewish people. So this character, Matthew, is an enemy of his own people in the eyes of his people. Now, there could have been a lot of justification for Matthew to be doing what he's doing, right? So you would have gotten well taken care of financially if you took this job. You were probably given a home of some kind, so you were able to support yourself in an area that might have been ridden with poverty. You were not having to succumb to that poverty if you didn't have the means to care for yourself. There could have been lots of reasons that had nothing to do with the political nature of the environment that would have caused someone like Matthew to participate in this. And this is where it gets tricky, right? Because in religious systems, oftentimes it's black and white. In churches, sometimes it's black and white. You're either in or you're out. And this is the first thing that religious people do to cause you to feel like you're separated, is that they give you an ultimatum, in or out. You either believe this or you don't. You're either fully in or you're not. You either have faith or you don't. And it's always black and white. There's never a gray. And I wonder if Matthew is an example of the gray, What does it look like to be in a position where it's like, do I want to do this? No, but this is what I'm doing to survive. And how many of us, we find ourselves in positions in life that maybe we didn't invite or ask for, but we're there. And that very position actually makes us feel like we're on the outside of the thing of our own people, of the places we want to be. And so I have empathy for Matthew. Now, I'm presuming a whole bunch here, right? That's part of the fun of the exploration. What we do know, based off of the response of the Pharisees at the back end and what we know culturally and historically, Matthew would have been viewed as an enemy of his own people because he was working alongside the empire against his own people who had been occupied by that very empire. So not a good look for Matthew, but we don't know the condition he was in. And so it's interesting and worth pondering, right? What's going on there. So Jesus says, follow me. He just invites him in. Isn't that a beautiful picture of Jesus? Follow me. Follow me. Here's someone who would have been viewed as an enemy of his own people. And Jesus says, hey, come on in. Come on and follow me. And it says that he got up and followed him. Now, I can't imagine the emotional appeal to that. A rabbi who traditionally would have made you feel on the outside, who may have hated you because of what you were doing. This person comes and invites you in. Guys, that's Jesus. Wherever you're at, Jesus invites you to follow him, right? He didn't say, hey, Matthew, I need you to quit your job and repent of all of the things that you're doing. I need you to make good on your relationships with the people that you've taken from. I need you to war against the empire that you have been complicit with. He put no conditions on him, did he? There's no conditions. He just says, follow me. This is the first step in anything that revolves around Jesus. Jesus just invites us to follow him. So I want to encourage you, if you feel like a Matthew and you're on the outside, you've been rejected, the first thing to know is that Jesus just says, hey, give me a chance. Follow me. Just give me a chance. Let's let go of all the things that you think I am. Just follow me. And that must have been so moving for someone like Jesus to see him that he just got up and he followed him. So at this point in the story, we have Matthew, we have Jesus. Then it goes like this. And as Jesus was having a meal in Matthew's house. So now we move from the workplace to home. And what home? Are we in Jesus's home? No, we're in Matthew's home. Guys, this is an important distinction. Jesus didn't invite Matthew to follow him to where he was at, right? It's like a lot of churches today. Get to church. Come to church. Come to where I'm at. Come be where I'm at, right? Like a lot of churches, who you bringing to church? Why haven't you brought anyone to church? How come no one's coming to church? Jesus said, follow me. And then Jesus went to where Matthew goes. He went to his house. Now, he's at his house and he's eating a meal with him. And it says that many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with Jesus and his disciples. So we've moved from Matthew and Jesus, where it always starts, one-on-one, to a communal environment where now there are multiple people. There are more tax collectors, just like Matthew, and an additional group of people called sinners. Now, this simply would have been people, it could have been more tax collectors who would have been viewed as sinners, but the distinction of sinners just simply indicates that these would have been people who didn't subscribe to the religious system that existed. They were non-religious, and so they would have been viewed by the religious people as sinners. That's what they would have been called because they were rejecting this religious institution that was surrounding them, whether that was, well, it most certainly would have been Jewish in nature because that's who Matthew's writing to. So tax collectors and people who have rejected the religious system that they found themselves in their area, the Jewish system. So now he's with them and the disciples are there. So there's now a community of people that have gathered around, one-on-one to community, and they're sharing a meal. Now, why is that important, right? In our world today, sharing a meal with people can be pretty common. But in the ancient world, to share a table with someone was an intimate relational dynamic. It meant you accepted them. To eat with someone at a table in this time and in this culture was more than just a casual hangout. It meant you belong. It meant you were accepted. So Jesus then invites people to come into this relational dynamic with others and eats a meal with them. Guys, this is revolutionary for a Jewish rabbi to do this. So, of course, when the Pharisees were a sect of Judaism that had strict protocol for what it meant to be in relationship with God. The Pharisees oftentimes get a bad rap in the scriptures. I don't think that's fair. I think the Pharisees, as we have been able to gather through historical context, these were just simply people that believed for God to come and redeem and rescue his people. He needed to have a group of people, the Jewish people, the Jewish nation, to be faithful to Torah. And so the Pharisees were strict observers of Torah to the point that they would develop rules and systems to actually help follow Torah better. This doesn't make them enemies. It just simply means they had a strong desire for God to come and rescue, and this is how they believed they were going to fulfill that. So what happened is that desire and that sense of longing for God to rescue got quickly turned into a way of controlling and policing people, right? As a lot of religious institutions turn into. What starts as a honorable way to honor God turns into control, manipulation, and judgment and abuse of power when people aren't doing it the way that they think they should do it. And this is what happened to the Pharisees. So the Pharisees see them. They say, "Why is your teacher eating with these people?" Jesus responds to them, "Look, I'm here for the people that are on the outside, the outcast. I'm here for them to be seen, to be brought into relationship with me." And so I love this story. And guys, I'm kind of going off the rails here a little bit and taking a little bit too much time talking about this. What I love about this story is it reminds us that if you are on the outside of the defined system that we call religion, you are not on the outside of Jesus. You're not on the outside of Jesus. Jesus actually invites you into a relationship with him, goes to where you're at, and meet you where you're at, surrounds you with people who will love and care for you, and brings healing to your life. Isn't it interesting that he says, "I did not come to call the righteous, but the sinners." I came for the people who are on the outside, the people that have given up on me, the people that don't see a place in their life for me. That's who I've come from. And he uses words like healing and physician and sickness, that those of us who feel like we're on the outside, we are in need of healing. We are in need of a physician because our hearts have been broken by the very people we trusted to say that now say we don't belong. That we don't have a place. Those people in our lives that have made us feel like we're on the outside because of maybe we have doubts, maybe we have concerns, maybe we have questions, maybe we don't think like you think, or they think, I guess. I'm talking to the camera, like the person who has made you feel that you are on the outside. Jesus says, no, you're actually closer to me than you think. This is such a beautiful story of the heart of Jesus. And when we discover that we are closer to him than we may think, true healing can begin. And we can begin to see Jesus for who he really is. Not what people just simply said about him, but his actions that we find in the Gospels that sometimes don't match up with the religious systems we're surrounded with. We need to look at Jesus. We need to explore Jesus. And I would encourage you, you need to begin to learn to trust in Jesus, because then you may just find the healing you're looking for. Okay, I'm just saying. I've said a lot here about the way that Jesus engaged with those who are on the outside. And I say all of that because I understand firsthand how you may feel. I recently have been made to feel like I don't belong. Again, I've been serving in pastoral ministry for 24 years. I have served faithfully in communities that I love and still love dearly, and yet have been made to feel like I don't belong or that I'm a threat because I do things like this and I talk openly about struggles and doubts and faith and points of views, and I don't shy away from things like drinking bourbon and talking about the Bible. I don't shy away from there are different viewpoints than what you've been raised to potentially think, whether that's women's roles, whether that's what happens in the afterlife, whether that is do we truly understand our faith and what it means to explore that in a healthy way, how we read the Bible, what is Genesis 1. I have a lot of ideas and thoughts and questions, and I created this channel for that reason, so we can explore together our faith. And I'm just saying right now, if you are in that place and you know people in that place, man, share this channel. This is a place for you. This is a community you can be a part of. You can write comments and I'm going to respond to your comments. You can email me. I'm going to respond to your emails. We're going to engage together. We're going to do live Q&As in the future where we can engage in real time. We have meetups in the Boise, Idaho area, and maybe hopefully somewhere more than that. Maybe in your hometown, we can start up some Barstool Theologies, local meetups where we wrestle together about faith, about the Bible, about God, about trust, about hurt, about pain, about struggles, about all those things. And you can be in a community of people that understand and are with you. This is what this is about. And so if you are someone who you feel like you're on the outside, you feel like you don't belong, you feel like you're not sure about this Jesus thing because of the hurt and pain you've experienced, I get it. I've been there myself. I'm currently in that season of frustration, of feeling like I'm on the outside simply because of how God made me. And I want you to know you're not alone. You're not alone. So if this has been helpful for you and encouraging for you, please respond, please comment, please subscribe and like if that's your thing. Share it with someone that may be struggling themselves and may be wrestling with this. Maybe that might help them too. All of that to say, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. All right, it's time for commenting on your comments. I've really enjoyed this segment because I'm getting more and more people commenting on videos, good and bad and indifferent. Some are spam, some are real. I'm trying to distinguish which ones are which and responding to the ones I think are real. So if I haven't responded to your comment me again and let me know about it and I'll respond. But I'm gonna highlight a couple comments here and I'm excited to do this. Okay. My boy, Tyler Keys, I know who you are. Tyler made a comment on my video. Is the gospel really what you think it is? This was an exploration of the gospels, particularly Mark's gospel. And I did a deep dive into it. I'll link to the video in our show notes, so you have that there. But I love a comment by Tyler. But he and I have had lots of conversations. But here was his question. So he said, like with Mark, how many other times is a book written by not its namesake? So Tyler, what I think you're getting at here is that if I remember right, maybe in the video I may have talked about that who wrote what and how we don't really know who wrote what books. Let me just dive into that a little bit. So much of what we know of the authors of the New Testament all came after the New Testament was written through tradition. So we only know certain stories after. Like these writers don't self-identify. Paul, in some instances, in his letters, his pastoral letters, will identify himself. There's a great deal of scholarship debate about that, whether it was the community of Paul, whether it was Paul himself. I'm just going to give the benefit of the doubt. I know that I may be wrong in that, but I don't think that that changes the implications of the writings just because maybe that person didn't write it. I tend to trust the traditional naming of the Gospels. I tend to trust that, Luke was written by Luke, who was Paul's physician, and subsequently wrote Acts. There's a lot of agreed upon early writings that identify Matthew is the writer of Matthew, but there is some different naming conventions there, so we're not even sure that. Even with John, there's some debate around whether the John of the disciple wrote John. I tend to think it is, but just know that there's a lot of debates around these naming who wrote what. And it was actually a popular practice in the ancient world to write something and then attribute it to a popular name so that it would gain notoriety. It would gain circulation. So one perfect example of this is the Gnostic writing, the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas was not written by Thomas the disciple that you read about in the Gospels. It's a 2nd century writing that name was attributed to it to give it popularity. That the pseudonym was commonly used. And so that doesn't wreck my faith. That doesn't bother my faith. Some people that might shake them a little bit. I don't think it impacts the credibility and the integrity of the text itself if it were written by someone else. I tend to fall kind of on the tradition that we have it now, but also giving myself room to say it may have been written by someone else that just applied that name to it. So it's actually quite common. To answer your question, Tyler, we're really actually not very sure who wrote any of the New Testament texts. I mean, there's a few Pauline epistles that can be pretty confidently tied to Paul, but even then, did Paul write everything in those letters? Technically, no. He had scribes, he had helpers, he had people translating maybe his broken Greek into high form Greek. And so you see a lot of textual criticism comes in when you're looking at the stylistic form of the way words are used. You can tell a certain word being used at a later time versus an earlier time, which can give historians a reasonable idea of when something was written just by the language usage. We do the same thing today. If I use the word rad in the 80s, everybody would have known that was a great thing. That's rad. Well, people today don't use that word. And so would someone 20 years understand the same implications, right? So all that to say, we're not really sure. I tend to lean on just the tradition we have, and I'm comfortable with that. So there's that comment. Okay. Another comment that came in, this was regarding my video on resurrection. And so I did a Easter video on resurrection, reasons to believe the resurrection. Again, I'll link to it in the show notes. And I had quite a few comments in there because I was making some claims about, is it reasonable to believe in a resurrection? I was talking about, can we prove that a resurrection happened? No, because there were no video cameras. There's no DNA blood trail. No, we don't. All we have left is the evidence that we have in front of us. The written accounts of what happened, the cultural shifts that took place in the world after it happened, the way that the story was told. All of these things are the kinds of evidence you would expect to find from a 1st century situation like that. And so I made that whole video and made a couple reels. And in one of the reels that I made, or shorts that I made, if you saw it, there was Croatia survival. Croatia survival. If that's a statement, if that name is tied to your experience, man, I'm so sorry that you've had to have a terrible experience. But he said this: people have died for every religion ever invented. All were lied to and believe it. I can understand that, right? So I make the argument in the video that all the disciples died brutal deaths proclaiming that Jesus resurrected. If you watch the full video, you'll see I also make a clarification. People die all the time because of belief. That's not new. You're exactly right, Croatia survival, that people die all the time for belief. My argument, though, is this. People don't tend to die for things that they know are lies? I.e., if I make something up to try to convince you to do something, am I willing to die for that? What motivation would I have to die for a lie? Right? So this is the thing. Now, is that unequivocal proof that the resurrection happened? No. But what kind of evidence would you expect to find if something like that happened? Well, people dying for that. Like, they can't deny what they saw, and they're willing to die for it. And it wasn't just one person. It's just a known reality that we got to wrestle with. Is it the one thing that will convince anybody that the resurrection happened? No, I don't expect that. But if you mount that along with the other things that we talk about, all of a sudden you have a plate full of things that you've got to account for. And is that enough for you to go, yeah, maybe the resurrection did happen? Because that's the kind of evidence that was left behind. That's all my argument. But I do understand your point. People die all the time for belief. That's not the argument. People don't tend to die for things they know to be a lie. So that was. All that being said, I really appreciate your comments and your feedback. Please keep them coming in, and you may be featured on the next commenting on your comments. All right, folks, that does it for today's episode of Whiskey and the Writings. I want to thank you for joining me today on this important conversation of feeling on the outside and what does it look like for Jesus to pursue you. And I hope that if you are feeling on the outside, you're feeling like the outcast, you've been rejected by your faith community, that you can see that Jesus has not rejected you. And he invites you into a following relationship with him in spite of how the religious community has viewed, seen, and treated you. Yeah, that's this episode. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of comments about, well, Jesus, he talked about sin and you need to deal with the penalty of sin and all those things. And maybe we'll deal with that in another episode. That's not for this episode. I understand the arguments. I have some thoughts about it. We'll talk about that another time. Till then, enjoy, drink safe, drink responsibly, and we'll catch you next time on Whiskey and the Writings. Cheers.